This is all you got us. My dad sneered, holding the watch I saved 3 months for. Your brother pays the utilities, groceries, and mom's medicines. I smiled and responded, yeah, because I set it all to auto-pay from my account. Minutes later, my sister slid a note across the table. We've agreed you should move out. That night, I canceled every payment, froze the joint card, and sent one document to the landlord. By morning, they woke up to an eviction warning. I, 26M, stood in the living room holding a small gift box, watching my father unwrap the watch I'd spent 3 months saving for. His expression shifted from curiosity to something closer to disgust as he held it up to the light, turning it over in his hands like he was inspecting spoiled fruit. He asked what this was supposed to be, his voice dripping with disappointment. I told him it was his birthday present, that I'd been setting aside money from each paycheck. He let out this hollow laugh and said this was all I could manage to get him. He pointed out that my older brother had just paid this month's utilities, restocked the entire kitchen, and covered mom's prescription costs again. My father wanted to know what exactly I contributed to this household. The thing about being the youngest is that nobody really tracks what you do. They see the flashy gestures, the big-ticket items, the obvious contributions. They don't see the infrastructure holding everything together. I'd learned that lesson the hard way over the past year. I kept my smile steady and told him yeah, because I was the one who set up all those auto payments from my account. The room went quiet. My mother looked up from her magazine. My brother stopped scrolling on his phone. My sister, who'd been leaning against the kitchen doorway, straightened up. My father said I was lying, that my brother had been handling those expenses. I pulled out my phone and showed him my banking app, the transaction history going back 11 months. Utilities, groceries through an online service, mom's pharmacy, the landlord's rent payment. All of it automatically deducted twice a month, every month, from my account. My brother's face went red. He started to say something about how he'd been giving dad cash for those things. I asked him what cash, because I had all the receipts right here, and the only payments going out were mine. He fumbled, said he must have misunderstood what dad needed money for. My sister pushed off from the doorway and walked to the table. She pulled out a chair and sat down, and I watched her exchange glances with my brother. Something passed between them, some unspoken agreement that made my stomach drop before I even knew what was coming. She slid a notebook across the table toward me. I picked it up and read the single sentence written there. They'd all discussed it, apparently, and decided I should move out. Not asked, not suggested. Decided. I asked who exactly had agreed to this. My sister said all of them, that they'd talked about it last week while I was working a double shift. My brother added that I clearly couldn't afford to live here if I was giving dad a cheap watch for his birthday instead of something meaningful. My mother stayed quiet, but she didn't disagree. That silence cut deeper than anything they'd actually said. I asked about the auto payments, all the bills I'd been covering. My father waved his hand dismissively and said my brother would take care of it going forward, that I should focus on getting my own place since I was so independent. The irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted me gone because I wasn't contributing enough, but I was literally paying for everything. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. I told them I'd be gone by the end of the week. My sister looked relieved. My brother nodded like this was all very reasonable. My father went back to examining the watch, still shaking his head at it. That night, I sat in my room and opened my laptop. I'd set up all these payments through my bank's bill pay system, which meant I could cancel them just as easily. I went through each one methodically. Utilities, canceled. Grocery delivery service, canceled. Mom's pharmacy auto refill, canceled. Rent payment to the landlord, canceled. Then I remembered the joint credit card. My father had added me to his account 2 years ago, supposedly to help me build credit. What he'd actually done was give me full access to the account settings. I froze the card. Just temporarily, the system said, pending verification. That verification would require him to call the bank, prove his identity, explain why he needed it unfrozen. It would take days. The last thing I did was draft an email to the landlord. I explained that I'd been covering the rent payments for the past 11 months through an automatic transfer, and that I was terminating this arrangement effective immediately. I attached screenshots of every transaction, every payment confirmation, every receipt. I explained that I was moving out and would no longer be responsible for the property. I suggested he contact the primary leaseholder about future payments. I hit send at 2:47 a.m. I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about how they'd react in the morning, what they'd say when they realized what I'd done. Part of me felt guilty. Most of me felt nothing at all. My father's shouting woke me up around 8. He was in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, his voice getting louder with each sentence. The credit card wasn't working. He tried to buy coffee on his way back from his morning walk, and the card had been declined. He wanted to know what kind of incompetent system declined a card that had been active for 15 years. I heard my brother's voice join in, then my sister's. They were all in the kitchen now, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. My mother suggested maybe it was a fraud alert. My father said that was ridiculous. He'd just used it yesterday. I got dressed slowly, taking my time. I packed a bag with my laptop, important documents, the few things I actually cared about. Everything else could stay. They'd probably throw it out anyway. When I walked into the kitchen, they barely glanced at me. My father was still on the phone with the bank, getting transferred from department to department. My brother was checking his own accounts, making sure his cards still worked. My sister was making a shopping list, apparently planning to go buy groceries the old-fashioned way. I poured myself coffee and sat at the table. My mother asked if I knew anything about the credit card issue. I told her I'd frozen it last night. The kitchen went silent except for my father's voice on the phone, and even that cut off mid-sentence. He asked me what I'd just said. I repeated it. I'd frozen the joint card around 3 this morning. I'd also canceled all the auto payments for utilities, groceries, and mom's prescriptions. And I'd informed the landlord that I wouldn't be covering rent anymore. My brother said I couldn't do that. I asked him why not, since they'd all agreed I should move out anyway. If I wasn't living here, why would I pay for anything here? He started to argue about the lease, about obligations, about family responsibility. I reminded him that my name wasn't on the lease. My father's was. I'd just been sending money out of kindness. My sister's face had gone pale. She asked when the landlord would expect the next payment. I told her it was due in 4 days. She asked if I'd already paid this month. I said no, that's why I'd sent the email. This month's payment never went through because I'd canceled it before it processed. My father ended his call with the bank. They'd told him the freeze could take 5 to 7 business days to resolve once he submitted the proper documentation. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. He said I was being vindictive and childish over a birthday present. I stood up and told him this had nothing to do with the watch. This was about them deciding I wasn't contributing enough while I was literally paying for everything. This was about them having a family meeting about kicking me out without even telling me to my face. They'd written a note like I was some tenant they wanted gone. My mother finally spoke. She said they hadn't meant it like that they just thought I might be happier with my own space. I asked her if she'd signed off on it. She looked away. That was answer enough. The doorbell rang. My sister went to answer it. I heard her talking to someone, her voice getting higher and more stressed. She came back holding an envelope, her hands shaking slightly. It was from the landlord. She opened it and read it out loud. Due to non-payment and notification of payment termination, they had 30 days to pay the outstanding balance plus next month's rent in advance or vacate the property. The landlord had included a copy of my email, highlighted the part about the 11 months of payments I'd made. My brother snatched the letter from her. He said this was insane, that the landlord couldn't just evict them with 30 days' notice. I pointed out that technically they could, because there was a clause in the lease about consistent payment history. If the rent was even 5 days late, the landlord had grounds to start eviction proceedings. And since I'd been paying it, and it was now 11 months behind in their names, the landlord was well within his rights. My father sat down heavily. He asked how much the total was. My sister did the math on her phone. 11 months of rent at $1,500 a month, plus next month in advance, plus late fees. Just over $20,000. Due in 30 days. My brother said he didn't have that kind of money. My sister said her savings were tied up in investments. My father said his retirement account couldn't be touched without penalties. They all looked at me. I finished my coffee. I told them I had the money, obviously, since I'd been paying it all along. But I wasn't going to help them now. They'd made it very clear I wasn't a valued member of this family. I was just the youngest kid who gave disappointing birthday presents and didn't contribute enough. My mother started crying. She said they'd made a mistake, that they hadn't understood how much I'd been doing. My sister said they could fix this, that we could all sit down and work it out like adults. My brother promised they'd never ask me to leave again. I picked up my bag. I told them I'd already booked a hotel for a few nights while I looked for an apartment. I'd be back for the rest of my things later this week. My father stood up and said I was tearing this family apart over pride. I said no, they'd torn it apart when they decided I was disposable. He brought up the watch again, said if I'd just put more effort into his gift, none of this would have happened. I pulled the watch from my pocket and set it on the table. I told him I'd bought it from a small jeweler downtown, the same place he'd bought Mom's engagement ring 30 years ago. I'd had his initials engraved on the back and asked them to polish it the same way they'd polished that ring. It had cost me 3 months of savings not because it was cheap, but because I'd wanted it to mean something. He picked it up and turned it over. The engraving caught the light. His expression shifted again, but I was already walking toward the door. My sister called after me. She wanted to know what they should do about the utilities, the groceries, Mom's medications. I told her my brother had volunteered to take care of all that, so I was sure he'd figure it out. She said he couldn't afford it. I said that wasn't my problem anymore. I stopped at the door and turned back. My father was still holding the watch, staring at the engraving. My mother had her face in her hands. My brother was rereading the eviction notice like he'd find some loophole in the fine print. My sister stood in the middle of the kitchen looking lost. I told them they had 30 days to figure it out. Maybe they could all chip in together, pool their resources like a real family. Or maybe they'd learn what it felt like to have everything fall apart because nobody was paying attention to who was actually holding things together. My father asked if I really hated them this much. I said I didn't hate them at all. I just didn't know them anything anymore. There's a difference. Update 1. I moved into a furnished studio apartment a week later. It was small, but it was mine, and nobody could decide I should leave. The landlord called twice asking about the property situation. I gave him the dates I'd made payments and suggested he work directly with my father going forward. I didn't offer to help bridge the gap. My sister texted constantly for the first few days. She'd found out that my brother had been lying about covering expenses. He'd been telling my parents he was paying for things, then using the money Dad gave him for other stuff. She wanted to know if I'd known about this. I told her I'd suspected, but never confirmed it until the day I left. She asked if I'd reported him. I said no, that wasn't my responsibility either. If they wanted to handle his theft, that was between them. She went quiet after that. My brother called once. He said the utility company had shut off their electricity after 2 weeks of non-payment. They'd had to scramble to get it turned back on, and the reconnection fee was $300. He wanted to know if this made me happy. I asked him if he remembered the note my sister had written. He said yes. I asked him if he'd thought about how I'd feel reading that. He said it was just practical, that they'd needed the space. I told him to enjoy his space in the dark and hung up. The deadline came and went. My mother called on day 31. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. The landlord had filed eviction papers. They had 1 week to vacate. She begged me to help them, said she'd never ask me for anything again. I asked her where she'd been when they were deciding to kick me out. She said she'd been in the other room, that she hadn't really participated in the discussion. I asked if she'd objected. The silence stretched out. I told her I hoped they found somewhere comfortable to stay and ended the call. My father showed up at my apartment on day 35. I don't know how he found my address. He looked older than he had a month ago, tired in a way that went deeper than missing sleep. He said they were moving into a 2-bedroom apartment across town, that they'd sold most of their furniture to cover the deposit. He held out the watch I'd given him. He said he wanted me to have it back, that he didn't deserve it. I told him to keep it. He asked why. I said because every time he looked at it, he'd remember that gifts weren't about the price tag. They were about the thought behind them. And every time he checked the time, he'd remember the 3 months I'd spent choosing it for him. He set it on my doorstep and walked away. I watched him get into my brother's car. Apparently, he'd sold his own to help cover moving costs and drive off. I picked up the watch and put it in my drawer. I haven't looked at it since. Update 2. 3 months later, my sister called. She'd moved out of the family apartment and gotten a place with her boyfriend. She said living with Mom, Dad, and our brother in a small 2-bedroom had been unbearable. Everyone was angry all the time, blaming each other for what had happened. She said our brother had finally admitted he'd been pocketing the money Dad gave him for bills. He'd been doing it for over a year, assuming I'd keep covering everything and nobody would notice. Dad had stopped speaking to him. They were living in the same apartment, but treating each other like strangers. She asked if I felt vindicated. I told her I didn't feel much of anything. She said that was worse somehow. That anger would have meant I still cared. I asked her what she wanted me to say. She didn't have an answer. Mom's medications had gotten complicated. Without the auto refill system I'd set up, they'd missed several doses. Her condition had worsened enough that she'd needed a hospital visit. Dad had blamed himself, then blamed my brother, then blamed me for canceling the service. My sister wanted to know if I'd known that would happen. I told her no, but I'd understood it was a possibility. She asked how I could live with that. I reminded her about the note. I asked if she could live with deciding someone should be homeless because they gave a disappointing birthday present. She cried. She said they'd all made a mistake, that they'd been too focused on my brother's contributions because they were visible. She said the problem with infrastructure was that you never noticed it until it was gone. I told her that was the most accurate thing anyone in the family had ever said. She asked if there was any chance of fixing things, of rebuilding what we'd had. I asked her what we'd had. She thought about it for a long time. Finally, she admitted she didn't really know. We'd been living in the same house, but we'd never been a family, not really. We'd been people going through the motions until the motions stopped working. I see my mother sometimes. She started attending a support group at the community center near my apartment, and we run into each other occasionally. We're polite. We ask about each other's health. We don't talk about what happened. It's easier that way. My father sent me a card on my birthday this year. Inside was a check for 3 months' rent with a note that said this didn't make them even, but it was a start. I deposited the check and sent a thank you text. I didn't say we were even. I didn't say we weren't. Some things don't need to be said. My brother and I don't speak. I hear about him through my sister. He moved out 6 months after the eviction, couldn't handle living with the weight of what he'd done. He's doing okay, apparently. Working 2 jobs to pay back Dad for all the money he stole. It'll take him years. Sometimes I think about that night, sitting at my laptop canceling payments one by one. I wonder if I knew exactly what would happen or if I just wanted them to understand what they'd lost. I think it was both. I think I wanted them to feel the foundation crumble the way I'd felt reading that note. The watch sits in my drawer. I haven't worn it, and I never will. But I haven't thrown it away either. It reminds me that you can't measure someone's worth by what they display. You measure it by what they do when nobody's watching, when there's no applause, when the only thing you get in return is knowing you kept everything from falling apart. They learned that lesson the hard way. So did I. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe us for more such real-life-based stories. Thanks in advance.